The star system of Viridian Prime pulsed with the quiet hum of commerce and stability. For cycles uncounted, the Zenith Conclave had presided over this sector of the galaxy, a beacon of reasoned governance and technological advancement. Their fleets, elegant and numerous, patrolled the deep void, assuring peace. High Legate Xylos, a being of crystalline grace and ancient wisdom, regarded the holographic projection of a newly completed orbital defense platform with serene satisfaction. The Cathar hegemony, an upstart empire of chitinous warriors, had dared to push their crude, bioengineered fleets into conclave space. Their aggression was concerning, but ultimately, Xylos believed, futile. They were a momentary irritation, a blip in the grand tapestry of galactic order. Xylos had heard the old whispers, the tales spun by elder races around nebula fires. Legends of humanity, a species from a distant, extreme environment world, said to possess an unsettling resilience, a raw ferocity that bordered on the mythical. They were said to have vanished eons ago, consumed by their own internal conflicts, leaving no trace but distorted, unsettling fables. No credible record of their existence remained in any conclave archive. To Xylos, they were a concept, not a reality. A convenient scare story to ensure compliance among unruly fringe worlds. The Cathar, however, were very real, and their advance was steadily eroding the conclave's borders, albeit slowly. Then, without warning, the void above the strategic Cathar staging world of Gris, 7 tore open. Not a hyperspace jump, not a wormhole, but a rending of space itself, a shimmering, incandescent rift that pulsed with raw, untamed energy. From its depths emerged a fleet unlike any known to the Conclave or the Cathar. These were not the organic, segmented forms of the Cathar dreadnoughts, nor the sleek, light-sculpted vessels of the Zenith Conclave. These ships were brutalist, functional, masses of hardened alloys and overlapping armor plating. Their lines were sharp, almost aggressive, devoid of any aesthetic flourish. They bristled with weapon emplacements, dormant but radiating an unseen, unsettling power. No insignia marked their hulls. No heraldry adorned their bows. Just silent, stark machines of war. The Cathar, ever arrogant in their numerical superiority, were the first to react. Their command carrier, the Iron Husk, bristled with bioplasma lances, unleashing a volley that ripped across the void, arcing towards the lead human vessel. The concentrated energy burst should have vaporized it, should have reduced the metallic behemoth to superheated vapor. But the human vessel did not even flinch. Its angular hull absorbed the incandescent impact, a fleeting shimmer across its plating, like water against rock. No shields collapsed. No alarms blared. The Cathar commanders, chitinous faces contorted in confusion, watched as their most potent weapon failed to even scratch the anomaly. Then the human ship retaliated. There was no elegant energy beam, no light-speed particle cascade. Instead, a series of short, brutal flashes erupted from its forward batteries. Colossal projectiles, each the size of a Cathar light cruiser, erupted from the human vessel. They were not driven by energy coils or propulsion fields, but by sheer, unimaginable velocity. The rounds tore through the void, incandescent with their own friction, slamming into the Cathar formation. The soundless impact was conveyed across the void by the shuddering of Gris 7 itself. Cathar shields, designed to deflect the heaviest conclave bombardments, shattered like fragile crystal. Hulls designed to withstand planetary re-entry crumpled inward, ripped apart by raw, kinetic force. The Cathar vessels, once so formidable, simply ceased to exist, collapsing into expanding clouds of debris. The humans did not hesitate. Their fleet, numbering in the hundreds, advanced with terrifying precision. Each vessel moved as part of a single, immense entity. Formations were tight, movements practiced through millennia of unseen conflict. There was no wasted motion, no superfluous energy signature. They fought with the cold, absolute efficiency of a species for whom survival was not a choice, but an instinct etched into their very essence. The battle over Gris 7 did not last long. The Cathar hegemony, once the undisputed apex predator of their expansionary sector, found themselves utterly neutralized in mere hours. Their mighty command carriers were reduced to drifting husks. Their warlords, who had terrorized dozens of systems, fell silent forever. As abruptly as they had arrived, the human fleet ceased its assault, settling into an unnerving silence amidst the wreckage. A single, clear transmission pulsed outward, broadcast on all known galactic frequencies. The voice was deep, resonant, and carried an echo of forgotten echoes. It spoke in a language no modern translator could fully comprehend, yet its meaning was conveyed with stark, undeniable clarity through an accompanying, surprisingly precise, universal script translation. "We are humanity. You thought US gone. You were wrong." Across the stars, the Zenith Conclave, the mighty Cathar hegemony, and 1,000 other lesser empires trembled. The legend of humanity had returned, not as myth, but as an undeniable, terrifying reality, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The aftermath of the Battle of Gris 7 sent shockwaves through the entire known galaxy. The Cathar hegemony, a power that had been expanding unchecked for centuries, had been utterly crushed. What was meant to be a swift Cathar conquest of Gris 7 had turned into a massacre, their massacre. The Zenith Conclave, watching from their pristine orbital stations, struggled to comprehend the scale of the devastation. The legends had spoken of humanity as a brutal but ultimately self-destructive species, one that had burned too brightly and consumed itself in internal strife. Yet here they were, their ships prowling the wreckage, salvaging their defeated foes with chilling efficiency. The humans had not come for diplomacy. They had not arrived seeking allies or forgiveness for their long absence. They had come as an unstoppable force, a reckoning. High Legate Xylos stood in stunned silence in the grand chamber of the conclave as reports flooded in from across the network. The battle had lasted less than 4 hours. The Cathar armada, estimated at over 1,000 warships strong, had been utterly eradicated. Even the most powerful empires in the conclave, in their combined might, had never achieved such a swift and decisive victory. Xylos's crystalline blood ran cold as she watched the human fleet on the holoscreen. Their warships formed an impenetrable wall in what was now Cathar-controlled space. No hails, no diplomatic gestures, just an eerie, unnerving silence as if they were waiting for something. "Have we sent a delegation?" One of the conclave's delegates, a Zecorian elder, rasped, its 4 mandibles clicking nervously, a clear sign of profound unease. "We attempted," Xylos stated, her delicate digits gripping the edges of the display table. "They ignored our messages, no response, no threats, nothing." "That silence," she concluded, "is worse than any declaration of war." A reptilian negotiator from the G-Vax Republic rumbled, "Silence is the weapon of predators." Xylos did not disagree. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the United Human Systems flagship, the vanguard of Sol, Admiral Valerius Thorn watched as his fleet completed their sweep of the battlefield. What remained of the Cathar fleet was now little more than floating, incandescent scrap. The ship's tactical AI, designated Oracle, projected casualty reports onto his command console. Cathar forces eliminated, 99.8%. Human casualties, 0.07%. Thorn exhaled slowly. "That's too easy," he murmured. "They were supposed to be the apex predators of this sector." Captain Anya Sharma, standing beside him, a faint scar tracing her left cheek, offered a grim smile. "They thought we were a myth, Admiral. Ghost stories don't usually shoot back." Thorn wasn't smiling. They didn't understand what they were facing. Not yet, but they will. A low chime echoed across the bridge. Oracle's synthesized voice broke the silence. We have intercepted conclave communications. They are watching. They are afraid. Good, Thorne said, his voice quiet. Let them be afraid. Let them remember. His eyes darkened as he turned towards the viewport, staring into the vast void where the conclave's greatest empires lay. Prepare the fleet, he commanded. We're just getting started. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Zenith Conclave was paralyzed by fear. The humans had reappeared like wraiths from the abyss, their warships cutting through the Cathar hegemony's armada with an efficiency that defied all known logic. But it wasn't just their firepower that terrified the Conclave. It was their silence. No boasts, no threats, no ultimatums, just the quiet, methodical destruction of anyone who stood in their path. On the Conclave's capital world, Xylos convened an emergency summit. The Grand Chamber, usually a place of calculated politics and quiet diplomacy, was now filled with whispers of dread. Every major empire had sent a representative. Even the isolationist Mylorian collective, notorious for their disdain for interspecies politics, had joined the gathering. A massive holographic projection displayed the latest reports. The humans hadn't stopped at the Cathar armada over Gris 7. They were systematically dismantling the hegemony's empire, station by station, world by world. The Cathar, once feared as brutal conquerors, were now little more than prey. This is a crisis unlike any other, Xylos declared, her luminous eyes scanning the room. The humans are no longer myths, they are real, and they are advancing. A GVAX general clicked its claws against the polished stone table. Have they made any attempt to communicate? A tense pause followed before one of the Zecorian envoys, a multi-limbed diplomat named Kales, shook his head. Nothing. They don't negotiate, they don't respond, they only act. A Mylorian elder let out a sharp, chittering sound. Then they are no different than the Cathar. We should unite and eliminate them before they become unstoppable. Xylos's delicate jaw tightened. How arrogant! The Mylorians had always believed in overwhelming force, but even they should have recognized the futility of such a plan. You misunderstand, she articulated. We do not face a mindless swarm or a warlord's ambition. We face something else entirely. The room fell silent as she gestured to the next report. The holographic display shifted, revealing grainy footage of a captured human transmission. It had been intercepted from a human scouting vessel, one of the few pieces of intel they had managed to obtain. A voice, deep and calm, filled the chamber. We do not seek war, but we will not be forgotten. Then the screen changed again, this time showing a planet the humans had recently wrested from the Cathar. Instead of the expected mass destruction, something far more chilling was unfolding. The humans were rebuilding. Factories roared to life under their control. Orbital defenses were being reconstructed, not for the Cathar, but for human systems. Even the local populace, many of whom had been subjugated by the Cathar, were left unharmed, seemingly integrated into the new order. This, Kales muttered, staring at the image in disbelief. This is not the work of conquerors. This is the work of an empire. A species that never truly fell, Xylos finished, her voice barely a whisper. A species that is reclaiming what it lost. The realization settled over the conclave like a shroud. The humans had not returned for vengeance against the Cathar, at least not solely. They had returned to rule. Far beyond the conclave chambers, aboard the vanguard of Sol, Admiral Valerius Thorne watched as the planet below, once a Cathar stronghold, was brought under firm human control. His officers worked efficiently, their movements precise, their faces hardened with the knowledge that they were carrying out something far greater than a simple campaign. This was their legacy. The galaxy had cast humanity aside, erased their history, and moved on. That mistake would not be repeated. A soft chime from the console broke his thoughts. The fleet had intercepted another transmission from the conclave. This one was urgent, a request for immediate peace talks. Thorn exhaled slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. "They finally understand," he murmured. Captain Sharma raised an eyebrow. "What now, Admiral? Do we negotiate?" Thorn turned to face his officers, his voice steady. "Not yet." He looked back at the viewport, where the rest of the fleet loomed, their massive hulls gleaming in the cold void. "First," he said, "we make them remember who we are." The Zenith Conclave's message requesting peace talks had gone unanswered. Days passed, then weeks. Silence was all they received in return, yet the humans did not strike at Conclave worlds, they did not invade sovereign systems, nor did they make demands. They simply continued their methodical dismantling of the Cathar hegemony, taking system after system with brutal, unwavering efficiency. The Cathar, who had once terrorized the stars, were now running, scattering like insects before an oncoming inferno. It was not a war, it was an eradication. The Conclave had never seen anything like it. Wars in the past had always been drawn-out affairs, fueled by politics, fragile alliances, and resource struggles. The humans, however, fought differently. There were no prolonged sieges, no half-measures. Each battle was swift, decisive. They advanced like a force of nature. Unstoppable, inevitable. High Legate Xylos could feel the weight of history pressing down on her as she reviewed the latest reports. Cathar-controlled worlds taken, 48. Cathar warships neutralized, 2,512. Human fleet losses, negligible, and now something even more terrifying. The Cathar homeworld, Chitinous Prime, was under siege. It had taken the humans less than 2 months to do what the entire Conclave had failed to accomplish in centuries. "They are eliminating them," a Zecorian elder hissed from across the Conclave chamber, its mandibles twitching in unease. "Every Cathar warlord, every officer vanquished without trial. And yet," Kales, the Mylorian diplomat, murmured, "they do not harm civilians, they do not pillage." The room fell silent as the realization settled. The humans were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were something far worse. They were erasing an enemy from history itself. "They must be stopped," the GVAX general growled. "If they could do this to the Cathar, they could do it to any of us." "Then perhaps," Xylos said slowly, her voice soft, "we should stop thinking of them as a threat and start thinking of them as something else." The Conclave turned to her, confusion evident in their varied expressions. She inhaled sharply, then made her decision. "I will go to them myself." A hushed murmur filled the chamber. "You would go to them?" the Mylorian representative spat. "To creatures who have ignored every attempt at diplomacy?" "They are not creatures," Xylos corrected. "They are survivors, and if we do not understand them, we will all fall." Aboard the Vanguard of Sol, Admiral Valerius Thorn stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the battle unfold on Chitinous Prime. The Cathar homeworld burned beneath them, its once mighty defenses crumbling. They had refused to surrender, so the humans had given them annihilation. But as his officers monitored the final phase of the assault, a new signal appeared on the comms. "Admiral," Captain Sharma stated, her eyes widening, "we're receiving a direct transmission." Thorn frowned. "Cathar resistance?" "No," Sharma swallowed. "It's from the Zenith Conclave, and it's not just another request." Thorn turned to face her fully. "They're sending an envoy." Silence filled the bridge. The humans had ignored every attempt at diplomacy thus far, but now the Conclave was desperate enough to send someone directly. Thorn exhaled slowly, considering the implications. Finally, he nodded. "Let them come," he said. His gaze drifted back to the expiring world below. "But they won't find the same galaxy they left behind." The Zenith Conclave's envoy arrived under heavy escort. A lone diplomatic vessel, adorned with the sigil of the Conclave, exited hyperspace near the human fleet. It was a sleek and elegant craft, designed not for war but for peace. It drifted cautiously through the void, dwarfed by the immense warships of the Vanguard of Sol and its armada. Inside, High Legate Xylos sat rigid in her chair, her delicate digits tightening around the armrests. This was madness. Suicide, some had called it. No alien of the modern era had ever stood before a human in known history, not in diplomatic matters, not in war, and yet here she was. The humans did not fire upon her ship. They did not acknowledge her arrival with hostility. Instead, a single transmission crackled through the comms. "Docking sequence authorized. You may proceed." The voice was cold, calculated, a warrior's voice. Xylos' second-in-command, a silver-skinned Zecorian named Relan, shifted uneasily beside her. "We should be prepared for an ambush." "If they wanted us gone," Xylos replied, "we wouldn't have made it this far." The docking process was seamless, almost too precise. As the ship latched onto the human vessel, a hiss of decompression signaled the opening of the airlock. Then the humans appeared. A squad of soldiers clad in black and gray armor, helmets concealing their faces, moved with perfect discipline. Their weapons were at their sides, but Xylos could feel the tension in the air. These were warriors, hardened, efficient, and ready to act at a moment's notice. At their center stood a male she knew only by reputation, Admiral Valerius Thorn. His presence was like gravity itself, an unseen force pressing down on the room. His uniform bore no medals, no ostentatious display of rank, just a single insignia on his shoulder, the sigil of the United Human Systems. His gaze locked onto hers, assessing, cold, unreadable. Then he spoke. "You asked for a meeting, here we are." His voice was devoid of warmth. It was not welcoming nor overtly hostile. It simply was. Xylos inhaled sharply and stepped forward. "I am High Legate Xylos, representing the Zenith Conclave." Thorn did not blink. "I know who you are." Her throat tightened. Negotiating with other empires had always been a delicate balance of charm, persuasion, and carefully measured words, but something told her none of that would work here. "Then you know why I come." Thorn studied her for a moment before turning sharply. "Walk with me." She hesitated only briefly before following. As they moved through the Vanguard's corridors, Xylos took in her surroundings. Everything was practical, efficient, nothing wasted on aesthetics. These were not ships designed for comfort. They were instruments of war. "You didn't respond to our previous messages," she said carefully. "You had nothing to offer," Thorn replied without looking at her. "We were busy vanquishing an entire species," she shot back. Thorn finally stopped, turning his sharp gaze on her. "They were already defeated," he stated. "They just didn't know it yet." Xylos's breath hitched. There was no gloating in his voice, no arrogance, just a simple, terrifying certainty. She swallowed hard. "And what happens after the Cathar are gone?" Thorn resumed walking. "That depends," he finally turned to face her fully, his blue eyes like ice, "on whether the rest of you make the same mistakes they did." The meaning was clear. The Cathar had tried to conquer humanity's domain, and they had been erased for it. The Conclave had always believed themselves above such crude conflicts, above wars of annihilation. But as Xylos stared into the eyes of the male leading humanity's return, she understood the truth. This was not an empire built on diplomacy or politics. This was an empire built on a long-held purpose. And the galaxy had every reason to be afraid. Xylos had negotiated with warlords, emperors, and tyrants, but never had she stood before someone like Admiral Valerius Thorn. The humans were unlike any species she had encountered, not just because of their technology or their military precision, but because of the way they carried themselves. Every step was calculated, every action measured. They moved like shadows returned to haunt the living. Thorn led her into a dimly lit chamber, devoid of unnecessary decoration. A single table sat in the center, surrounded by utilitarian chairs. Tactical displays flickered along the walls, depicting real-time fleet movements. The Cathar hegemony, once one of the greatest military forces in the galaxy, was being crushed in real time before her very eyes. Thorn gestured toward a chair. "Sit!" Xylos hesitated before lowering herself into the seat. Thorn remained standing. "You came here to talk," he said. "So talk." She exhaled. "The Zenith Conclave wishes to open negotiations with humanity." "For what?" His voice was unreadable. "You didn't care about negotiations when you erased us from your history." Xylos flinched. The Conclave had long treated humanity as a myth, a fallen civilization, a story to caution young diplomats into obedience. "Never provoke a war you can't win," the saying had gone, "or you'll end up like the humans." Now the ghosts had returned to settle the debt. "I won't deny what the Conclave has done," she said carefully. "But we did not erase humanity out of malice. You vanished. No ruins, no remnants, no transmissions. We assumed—" "You assumed wrong," Thorn interrupted, his eyes burning cold. "We were never gone. We were watching." A shiver ran down her spine. Xylos composed herself. "If you were watching, then you know the Conclave is not your enemy. The Cathar were a threat to all of us. They invaded, enslaved, and destroyed without mercy, and yet you let them." She had no response to that. Thorn finally sat, resting his hands on the table. "Tell me, High Legate, why are you really here?" Xylos took a slow breath. "Because the Conclave fears what happens after the Cathar are gone." The silence stretched between them. "Smart," Thorn muttered. For once, he leaned back slightly. "So let's talk about the truth. Your Conclave doesn't want peace. It wants to contain us, to keep humanity from doing what it was always meant to do." "And what exactly is that?" she asked. Thorn met her gaze. "Take back what's ours." A cold weight settled in her chest. "You believe the galaxy belongs to you?" His lips curled slightly. "No, but I know what was stolen from us, and we will never let it happen again." Xylos clenched her fists under the table. She had hoped for reason for diplomacy. Instead, she had found something worse than an enemy. She had found a civilization with a purpose deep enough to shake the stars. If humanity had returned, then transformation was inevitable, and the Conclave had no idea how to stop it. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Xylos had never felt so helpless in a negotiation before. Every empire in the Zenith Conclave had its weaknesses: pride, greed, desperation for resources. She had spent her career learning to exploit those flaws, bending entire civilizations to her will through careful diplomacy. But the humans, they didn't need anything. They weren't desperate for trade routes, fuel, or alliances. They had arrived from the void with their fleets fully supplied, their armies disciplined, their goals singular. They were a force already prepared to take what they wanted, and that made them the most resolute civilization the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Thorn studied her, his piercing blue eyes betraying no emotion. The humans were not merely purposeful, they were patient. They had waited in the shadows for centuries. Xylos took a steadying breath. "What exactly is it that humanity wants, Admiral?" Thorn exhaled slowly, as if considering whether she was even worth answering. "We want rectification." Xylos's pulse quickened. Rectification. A vague, dangerous word. She leaned forward. "The Cathar are nearly eradicated. You've dismantled their empire, eliminated their fleets, and taken their homeworld. If this was about rectification, it should be over." Thorn tilted his head slightly, the hint of a grim smile tugging at his lips. "You think this ends with the Cathar?" Her blood turned to ice. Thorn continued, "They were just the beginning, the ones foolish enough to strike first, but the rest of you, the ones who stood by and watched. The ones who let it happen." He leaned in. "You're next." Xylos's breath caught in her throat. "Humanity was abandoned," Thorn said, his voice measured but cold. "We had allies, friends. We built an empire once, one that spanned the stars. And when the war came, when we needed help the most, the Conclave, you looked away." Xylos's mind raced. She had read the ancient records, the conflicting accounts of humanity's supposed downfall. Some had claimed the humans destroyed themselves in war. Others said their home world was consumed by some unknown force. But no record spoke of an alliance, of a deliberate abandonment. Thorne continued, his voice heavy with the weight of history. When the war came to our doorstep, we sent distress calls, pleas for aid. We fought alone. We fell alone. Xylos swallowed hard. That was centuries ago. Thorne's expression didn't change, and yet here we are. The meaning was clear. Humans never forget. A cold realization gripped her. You don't just want rectification, you want retribution. Thorne didn't deny it. Instead, he simply stated, we will make sure no species ever forgets humanity again. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Xylos had come here hoping to find common ground, but now she saw the truth. This wasn't just about eliminating a threat. It wasn't even about war. Humanity was reclaiming its place in the galaxy, and the Conclave had two choices: bend the knee or be swept away. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What happens now? Thorne stood. Now, he looked toward the holodisplay where human fleets were already moving toward new systems. Now you decide whether you want to survive the new order or be part of the ruins we leave behind. Xylos had never feared anything in her life, until now. Thank you for watching part 1 of They Thought Humans Were Myths, until their armada appeared. If you enjoyed this cosmic confrontation, please hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling HFY sagas. What do you think will happen next between humanity and the Conclave? Let us know in the comments below, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Join us for part 2. Xylos had always considered herself a master of diplomacy, but for the first time in her life, she felt like a novice, standing before something she could not negotiate with. Admiral Thorne and his people did not operate like the other civilizations of the Conclave. They did not seek political maneuvering, resources, or trade. They did not beg for recognition or ask for a seat at the table. They were here to take what had been denied to them. The cold certainty in Thorne's voice sent a shiver through her crystalline bones. "You misunderstand, Admiral," she said carefully, choosing her words like a surgeon handling a delicate blade. "The current Conclave is not the one that abandoned you. We are willing to acknowledge our past oversights to forge a new relationship with humanity." Thorne exhaled sharply, almost amused. "A relationship like the one you had with the Cathar?" Her breath caught. He knows. He knew the truth. The Conclave had allowed the Cathar to expand their war machine unchecked. They had turned a blind eye when the Cathar enslaved lesser species. They had only acted once the Cathar grew too powerful to control. She had assumed no one would ever challenge the Conclave's hypocrisy, but humanity had not forgotten. "Your Conclave is built on convenience, not justice," Thorne stated, his tone not angry, nor did it carry any theatrical weight. It was just a simple statement of fact. "You tolerated the Cathar until they became a threat to you. You relegated us to myth because it was easier than acknowledging your failure." Xylos clenched her jaw, struggling to maintain her composure. "That does not mean conflict is the only path forward." Thorne regarded her for a long moment, then he turned to the holodisplay, tapping the controls. The image shifted, revealing a strategic map of the galaxy. Red zones marked the Cathar territories that had already fallen. Blue icons, human fleets, were now appearing in systems once thought unreachable, expanding, advancing. "Tell me, High Legate," Thorne said, still looking at the map, "do you know what happened to Terra?" Xylos hesitated. "No." Thorne finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Neither do we." The admission sent a chill through her. "Our home world was lost," he continued, "not destroyed, not wiped from existence, lost." Xylos's mind raced. That shouldn't be possible. No planet, especially one as important as humanity's cradle, could simply disappear. Thorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quiet intensity. "We searched for centuries, through the ruins of our old colonies, through the wreckage of a civilization that should have never fallen. But Terra was gone, no records, no coordinates, no trace. A sharp silence followed, and then Thorn spoke the words that made Xylos's blood run cold. "And we believe the Conclave had something to do with it." Her breath hitched. "That's impossible. You don't know your own history, Legate," Thorn interrupted, his gaze piercing. "But we do. We dug through the ruins, through archives you thought were lost. Someone removed Terra from the galactic record. Someone made sure we could never return home." Xylos felt the walls closing in around her. This was bigger than a simple power struggle. The humans weren't just reclaiming their empire, they were hunting for the truth, and when they found it, nothing in the galaxy would be safe. She exhaled shakily. If the Conclave was involved in the disappearance of Terra, I swear to you, I will uncover the truth." Thorn studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he smiled. A small, knowing, dangerous smile. "You'll try." He stood, nodding toward the door. "We're done here. You can return to your Conclave and tell them the same thing we've told every other empire that stood in our way." Xylos swallowed hard. "And what is that?" Thorn's expression turned to steel. "Humanity is back, and we are not asking for permission." Xylos left the vanguard of Sol with the weight of an entire civilization pressing down on her shoulders. The moment she stepped back onto her diplomatic vessel, she could feel the eyes of her crew on her, expecting answers, hoping for good news. She had none. Legate Relan, her Z-Corian second-in-command, approached her cautiously. "What did they say, High Legate?" Xylos sat down slowly, rubbing her temples. "Everything we feared, and worse." She had gone to negotiate peace, but peace had never been an option. The humans weren't interested in treaties, in alliances, or in restoring balance to the galaxy. They wanted rectification, they wanted retribution. And most terrifying of all, they wanted the truth. She turned to Relan. "Contact the Conclave, convene an emergency session. Now." The Conclave chamber was in chaos the moment her image flickered into the Holocene. Did they agree to stand down? Are they open to negotiations? Can they be reasoned with? Xylos clenched her fists. "No, the humans are not here to negotiate." The chamber exploded into frantic murmurs. Some of the Conclave members had still clung to the belief that this was all some elaborate posturing, that humanity could be bought, threatened, or persuaded into submission. "They were wrong." "The Cathar are finished," Xylos continued. "Their empire is gone, their fleets shattered. The humans will eliminate whatever remains of them within the next few weeks." A Mylorian elder clicked its mandibles anxiously. "And then what?" Xylos took a slow breath. "Then they come for us?" The room fell silent. "Impossible," growled a Jivax warlord. "We have committed no crimes against them." Xylos turned her sharp gaze to him. "Did you stand against the Cathar when they expanded?" The warlord hesitated. "Did you lift a single claw to stop them? Did any of us?" Silence. The answer was clear. "You don't understand," Xylos said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They believe we let their people fall. They believe we erased them from history. And now they are tearing through this galaxy like a force of nature because they will never let that happen again." A nervous diplomat from the Z-Corian Dominion hesitated. If they cannot be reasoned with, then we must prepare for war." "War," the Mylorian elder spat. "Against them, you saw what they did to the Cathar. No species in this conclave has the fleet strength to match them." The Jivax warlord slammed a clawed fist onto the table. "Then we unite. A combined conclave force could—" "Could what?" Xylos snapped. "Delay them, slow them down." She leaned forward, her luminous eyes burning. "The humans do not fight conflicts like we do. They do not conquer for territory. They do not seek resources. They do not play political games." She let her words sink in before delivering the final blow. "They fight to achieve their goals, and they do not stop until their enemies are no more." A heavy silence followed. The realization was finally settling in. This was no longer a question of politics or strategy. The galaxy had one choice: survive under the shadow of humanity's return, or be swept away. High Legate Xylos, her crystalline form trembling, had made her decision. "We cannot fight them," she declared, her voice echoing in the stunned chamber. "We must find another way, a way to prove our worth, to prove we are not the conclave they remember." Even as the conclave deliberated, fracturing into desperate factions, humanity's methodical advance continued. Admiral Thorne, aboard the Vanguard of Sol, watched as Cathar systems were swiftly brought into the United Human Systems fold. He observed the reports, populations integrated, infrastructure repurposed, not destroyed. Their methods were unnervingly efficient. "Admiral," Captain Sharma's voice cut through his thoughts, a rare note of alarm in her tone. "Long-range sensor arrays on the furthest Cathar frontier. They're registering an energy signature unlike anything we've detected. Not a fleet. Something else." Thorne turned from his holoscreen. "Define else, Captain." "Massive," Oracle's synthetic voice interjected, projecting a distorted, wavering image onto the tactical display. It was a swirling, dark vortex, impossibly vast, bleeding light from some unseen dimension. And expanding. Readings indicate a localized reality fracture. No known propulsion, no weapon signatures, just void disruption. The image resolved slightly, showing colossal, jagged spires of what appeared to be solidified shadow rotating slowly within the vortex. They were not ships. They were entities. Ancient, malevolent, and utterly alien. "Origin?" Thorne asked, his voice low, a rare tension in his posture. "Unknown, Admiral," Sharma replied, her gaze fixed on the anomaly. "It seems to be emerging from the deepest void, beyond any charted territory, and it's moving. Directly towards the former Cathar systems and then into conclave space." A cold dread settled over Thorne. He had expected resistance, diplomatic maneuvering, perhaps even a desperate, foolish war from the conclave. He had not expected this. He had planned for a war of reclamation, not an incursion of cosmic horror. On the conclave capital world, High Legate Xylos was mid-sentence, desperately pleading for unity, when alarms blared through the grand chamber. The holoscreen, moments before displaying humanity's encroaching blue markers, flared crimson. "Warning! Unidentified, non-corporeal entities detected in the Void's edge sector." A terrified technician's voice cried out. "They're consuming the Cathar remnants. Their energy signatures are anomalous. They're collapsing space itself." The image on the holoscreen shifted, showing the same horrifying vortex Thorne had seen. Its sheer scale was impossible, blotting out entire nebulae. Whispers of a long-forgotten terror, the Void Weavers, echoed through the chamber, ancient myths dismissed by the conclave as barbaric superstitions. But this was no myth. These were not the Cathar nor the humans. These were true monsters. The conclave, for all its might, had never faced something that defied the very laws of physics, something that fed on reality. Their advanced fleets, designed for conventional warfare, were useless against such a foe. Panic erupted. Aboard the Vanguard of Sol, Thorne's eyes narrowed. He recognized the pattern. He had seen similar distortions in the ancient archives, buried deep in humanity's hidden data vaults, records of a forgotten era, a time before their grand disappearance. This was not a random occurrence. This was a reawakening. And it was connected. "Oracle," Thorne commanded, his voice sharp with decision. "Cross-reference all known historical anomalies with current energy signatures. Prioritize any data related to the Great Silence." The ship's AI processed the request. "Acknowledged, Admiral, processing historical data. Warning, probability of direct conflict 98%. "Not conflict, Oracle," Thorne corrected, a grim determination hardening his features. "Containment! This is what we returned for." Captain Sharma looked at him, confused. "Admiral, containment of what?" Thorne turned to the main viewport, the swirling void anomaly now visible even at this immense distance, an ominous, expanding scar on the cosmos. "The galaxy thought humanity was a myth, Captain," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet resonating with ancient purpose. "But they weren't the only ones." He raised a hand, clenching his fist. "Prepare the fleet. Divert all reclamation efforts. We have a more urgent task. We hunt true monsters now." The Conclave watched in horror as the terrifying entities tore through the Cathar frontier, their very presence dissolving matter and energy into nothingness. Their despair was absolute. No defense held, no weapon even registered. Just as they believed all was lost, something happened. The human fleet, instead of continuing its advance on Conclave space, suddenly shifted. Their formations, previously poised to challenge the Conclave, now turned as one, not away from the threat but directly towards it. They were not fleeing. They were confronting the unquantifiable horror head-on. A collective gasp went through the Conclave chamber. They were sacrificing themselves, throwing their ships into oblivion. But then, as the human vessels plunged into the fringes of the anomaly, their brutalist hulls shimmered with a new, deep crimson light. A pulsating energy field, unlike any known to galactic science, flared to life around them. It was not a shield designed to deflect. It was a field designed to contain. And as the colossal shadow spires of the Void Weavers met the human lines, they did not dissolve. They screamed. A silent, telepathic shriek of pure, unadulterated pain that echoed through the minds of every sensitive species in the Conclave chamber, dropping them to their knees. The humans, meanwhile, held their ground. Their ships, bathed in the crimson glow, began to push back. Admiral Thorne watched the tactical display, his gaze intense. "They remember," he murmured. "They remember what we were built for." Captain Sharma, shaken but resolute, looked at the readings. "The energy drain is immense, Admiral. This containment field, it's consuming our core power at an unprecedented rate." Thorne didn't flinch. "Activate all reserves. Scramble the auxiliary power grids, every single watt. Let the galaxy see what happens when true evil awakens." He looked out at the churning chaos beyond their shields, at the unspeakable horror that had returned. "This isn't just about reclamation anymore, Captain. This is why we waited. This is why we never truly fell." The crimson glow intensified around the human fleet, pushing against the encroaching void, holding the line against the incomprehensible. The silent screams from the entities grew louder, more desperate. Xylos, slowly rising from the floor of the Conclave chamber, watched the holoscreen, a new, terrible understanding dawning on her. The humans hadn't just returned for revenge or to rebuild an empire. They had returned because they were the only ones who could return. The only ones built to fight what lurked beyond the veil. The myth of humanity was deeper, darker, and more vital than anyone had ever imagined. And now they stood alone against an ancient terror. Thank you for experiencing Part 2 of They Thought Humans Were Myths, until their armada appeared. If you're on the edge of your seat like the Zenith Conclave, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. What cosmic horror do you think humanity was built to combat? Leave your theories in the comments below. And don't miss the next thrilling chapter of this Humanity for the Win saga. The crimson glow around the human fleet intensified, a searing bulwark against the encroaching void. Each human vessel, from the smallest patrol craft to the colossal vanguard of Sol, pulsed with the strained energy of its containment fields. The silent screams of the Void Weavers, raw agony projected directly into the minds of any sentient being sensitive enough to perceive them, reverberated through the Conclave chamber. On the holoscreen, the terrifying, jagged spires of solidified shadow writhed against the human lines, unable to penetrate the invisible barrier. Yet relentlessly pushing, testing, seeking a flaw. Admiral Valerius Thorne stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his face a mask of grim determination. Sweat beaded on the brows of his crew, their fingers dancing over consoles, battling the immense power drain. The ship groaned, a deep, metallic thrumming echoing through its very structure. Alarms, previously silenced, began to chirp, then wail, indicating critical power fluctuations. Energy levels dropping across the entire containment array. Captain Sharma's voice was strained. 55%. Auxiliary grids are failing to compensate. We're taking a beating, Admiral. Hold the line, Captain, Thorne commanded, his voice unwavering even as a jolt rocked the bridge. He watched the tactical display, focusing on the distorted energy signatures of the Voidweavers. They were adapting, learning, finding the weak points in humanity's unique defense. Oracle, give me a full spectral analysis of the Voidweaver's disruption field. What are they made of? Admiral, their composition defies conventional physics, Oracle's synthesized voice replied, unusually devoid of its typical calm. They are not matter as we understand it. They are anti-existence, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Our containment fields are not repelling them. They are actively stitching reality back together around them, but the strain is immeasurable. Xylos, on the conclave capital world, watched the humans' desperate struggle with dawning horror. Her delicate digits were pressed to her temples, trying to block out the psychic wails that threatened to shatter her composure. Around her, conclave members lay prostrate, some whimpering, some in shock. The illusion of their galaxy's stability, their technological superiority, had been irrevocably shattered. These humans, these myths, were fighting a battle that transcended their understanding, a battle that had clearly raged long before their grand disappearance. What are they? Kales, the Zecorian diplomat, rasped, slowly pulling himself up from the floor. His mandibles trembled. An ancient terror, Xylos whispered, her gaze fixed on the holoscreen where the human fleet, now glowing a brighter, more desperate crimson, seemed to shrink against the monstrous entities. Older than any conclave record, older than our first starship. She had glimpsed fragmented data, hushed rumors from pre-conclave civilizations about aberrations in the void, places where stars had simply winked out. Legends dismissed as primitive fear-mongering. Now she knew the truth. On the Vanguard, the situation was worsening. Containment field Beta 7 failing, a crew member shouted. Energy leakage detected, hull breach imminent on the Stalwart. Thorne soared on the display. One of the human cruisers, a proud veteran of countless campaigns, was faltering. The crimson glow around it flickered, dimmed, and then a dark, jagged spire of shadow lanced through its primary containment field, twisting the very hull inward as if it were soft clay. No explosion, no fire. Just a grotesque, silent dissolution. Damage report on the Stalwart. Thorne's voice was sharp. No report, Admiral, Sharma yelled. She's gone, erased. The Voidweavers are adapting faster than we can recalibrate. A wave of despair threatened to wash over the bridge crew. To be erased, not defeated, was a horror unknown to conventional warfare. Thorne felt it too, a cold grip around his heart, but he pushed it down. Humanity had faced worse. They had endured the impossible. Oracle, reroute all non-essential power to the containment field generators, Thorne ordered. Cut life support to non-critical sections, divert all reserve batteries. We need to push them back. Admiral, that will put the crew at extreme risk, Sharma protested. Environmental controls will destabilize. Emergency lighting will be all that remains. Do it, Captain, Thorne roared, his eyes blazing. We hold this line. This is why we came back. This is our purpose. On the Conclave's holoscreen, the human ships flickered, their crimson glow momentarily dimming. Then, with a sudden, desperate surge, it flared brighter than ever before, a furious, defiant light against the encroaching darkness. But it came at a terrible cost. The Conclave's long-range sensors, momentarily overwhelmed by the energy surge, picked up secondary readings. Internal power grid collapse, atmospheric scrubbers failing, auxiliary systems shutting down. The humans were literally tearing their own ships apart to maintain the containment. They are sacrificing their own vessels, the GVAX general whispered, his scaled face pale. Not sacrificing, Xylos corrected, her voice now firm, a strange mix of fear and admiration. Committing. They are using their very ships, their very lives as the last bastion. This is what it means to be an extreme environment adaptive. This is their absolute limit. Back on the Vanguard, the bridge was now lit only by the frantic glow of console screens and the emergency lighting, casting long, eerie shadows. The air grew stale, and the hum of the ship was replaced by the strained whine of overloaded systems. But the containment field held. The Void Weavers shrieked again, a more frustrated, less victorious sound, as they recoiled from the amplified energy. "It's working, Admiral," Sharma gasped, clutching a console for support. "They're falling back, slowly, but for how long can we maintain this?" "Not long enough," Thorne replied, his gaze still fixed on the tactical map. The energy readings from the Void Weavers, though temporarily diminished, were still astronomically high. They had merely been surprised by humanity's desperate resilience, not truly defeated. He knew the cost of this desperate stand. They had bought time, but at a price that would cripple their fleet. They had prevented the immediate collapse of vast systems, but the threat was far from neutralized. And the Conclave, for all its might, had been utterly useless. Thorne turned to Sharma. "Captain, begin transmitting our operational data, our historical archives, everything Oracle can compile on the Void Weavers. Send it to the Zenith Conclave. All channels, prioritize High Legate Xylos." Sharma blinked, surprised. "Admiral, our tactical data, our vulnerabilities?" "They need to understand," Thorne said, his voice quiet, "not just the threat, but the stakes, and what it means to fight an enemy that consumes all." He looked out at the churning chaos of the Void Weavers, a dark stain on the cosmos. "They thought us myths, Captain. Let them see why we returned." The transmission flooded the Conclave's main network, bypassing all firewalls, overwhelming their systems with a torrent of encrypted data. Xylos's personal console flared to life, displaying a single message. "From humanity, for your comprehension." As the Conclave's data priests struggled to decrypt the immense data packet, a GVAX analyst, his features contorted in disbelief, stumbled back from his console. It's a record, ancient records of Earth, of humanity's early history." The holoscreen in the Grand Chamber, instead of displaying the ongoing battle, now showed images of a vibrant, verdant world. Not the barren, extreme environment world the legends described, but a world teeming with life, a cradle of civilization. Then the images shifted. Wars, struggles, triumphs, the rise of a spacefaring civilization. And then a gradual, terrifying change. A growing shadow on the edge of their star system. Distorted, fleeting glimpses of entities not unlike the Void Weavers currently tearing apart the Cathar remnants. And then the great silence. Not a destruction, but a devouring. A slow, agonizing erasure of a home world, not by conventional weapons, but by the very fabric of reality being unmade. And the fleeing human fleets sending out desperate pleas that went unanswered by a nascent, oblivious galactic community. The Conclave, in its infancy, had mistaken the silence for extinction, the desperate pleas for localized conflict. They had archived it, classified it as an anomalous, self-inflicted cataclysm, and moved on. They had not seen the truth. Xylos watched, tears gathering in her crystalline eyes. The malice she had attributed to the previous conclave was not malice, but ignorance, compounded by a desperate need to maintain their fragile new order. They had turned a blind eye to a dying species, simply because it was easier than confronting the truth of what was lurking in the cosmos. And when humanity had finally vanished, they had buried the records, dismissing them as the tragic end of a self-destructive people. The images continued, showing humanity's desperate retreat into the deep void, their long, arduous journey of rebuilding in the shadows, repurposing their ships, not for aggression, but for survival against a threat that never truly went away. Generations born and passing, driven by a singular purpose: to grow strong enough to develop the technology to return and face the ancient terror that had devoured their home. Their entire history for millennia had been a preparation for this moment. They didn't vanish, Kayleigh cried out, a horrified understanding dawning. They hid, they prepared. All this time they were building to fight this. The holoscreen returned to the present battle. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, was still holding the line. Their crimson containment fields pulsed, visibly draining them, but the Void Weavers were no longer advancing. They were being held at bay, their silent wails replaced by a furious, incoherent psychic roar of frustration. Admiral Thorne watched the anomaly. They had bought time, but the strain was immense. He saw the readings, the critical failures across his fleet. They couldn't maintain this for long. "Oracle," he said, his voice hoarse. "Target analysis on the primary Void Weaver entity. What's its weak point?" "Admiral, there is no conventional weak point," Oracle replied, its synthetic voice now layered with a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. "Its core is a nexus of pure void energy. A direct hit would require a concentrated energy output orders of magnitude beyond any known weapons system. Attempting such a discharge would risk catastrophic phase inversion across multiple vessels." "So, a suicidal attack," Thorne mused, his gaze unwavering. He had expected as much. Conventional warfare meant nothing to these entities. Humanity had always had to adapt, to innovate beyond the known. He remembered the ancient legends, the tales of their harsh worlders who had faced extinction on their own homeworld, not once, but countless times, and had always found a way. "Prepare the hammer protocol," Thorne commanded, his voice suddenly cutting through the strained silence of the bridge. Captain Sharma gasped. "Admiral, that protocol, it's a theoretical concept. It would require merging the core energy outputs of multiple capital ships, then firing them in a unified, synchronized burst." "Precisely," Thorne replied. "And it will likely burn out the core reactors of every vessel involved. Potentially catastrophic systems collapse." "Indeed," Oracle chimed in. "Probability of success, 7.2%. Probability of immediate human fleet destruction, 63.9%. "Admiral, we cannot risk it," Sharma pleaded. "The Conclave, they've seen what we're capable of. They'll help now. We don't have to do this alone." Thorne turned to her, his blue eyes filled with an ancient weariness, but also a burning resolve. "They'll help now, Captain, after millennia of silence. After we've sacrificed our home and our history to fight this unseen war. No, we do this because it is our burden, because it always has been." He looked back at the holoscreen, at the massive, swirling shadow spires of the Void Weavers. "We've bought them time, Captain, time to choose. But this fight, this very moment, belongs to us." "Target designation, primary Void Weaver nexus," Thorne announced, his voice echoing through the strained bridge. "All available capital ships prepare for hammer protocol, synchronize core discharges, unleash everything we have." On the Conclave's holoscreen, they watched in stunned silence as the human fleet, despite its battered state, began a terrifying new maneuver. 3 of humanity's colossal battle carriers, previously holding the line, began to slowly shift, converging on a single point directly in front of the largest Void Weaver entity. The crimson containment fields around them intensified to an almost blinding white, drawing immense power from their very ships. "What are they doing?" a Zikorian delegate whispered, his voice trembling. Xylos watched, a dreadful understanding dawning. "They're not just holding the line," she murmured. "They're attacking." The 3 human capital ships, the Vanguard of Sol, the Iron Will, and the Unyielding Spirit, pulsed with an almost unbearable internal energy. Their individual containment fields briefly faltered, then reasserted themselves with a furious, blinding white light. Then, from their forward sections, a singular, immense beam of pure, incandescent energy erupted. It wasn't a plasma lance or a kinetic round. It was a focused torrent of stabilized reality, a counterforce to the Voidweaver's anti-existence. The beam slammed into the core of the largest Voidweaver. There was no explosion, no flash of light. Instead, the monstrous entity writhed, its shadow spires twisting violently, and a soundless shriek, far more potent than anything before, ripped through the minds of every being in the conclave chamber, shattering consoles, forcing the Zecorian delegates to their knees, their delicate crystalline bodies cracking under the psychic pressure. The very air around them vibrated with pure agony. On the vanguard, the bridge was thrown into chaos. Sparks flew from consoles, the lights flickered violently, and a guttural, terrifying roar, physical this time, echoed through the very hull. "Primary core breach on the iron will," a technician screamed. "Secondary core failing on the unyielding spirit." Admiral Thorne stumbled, grabbing a console for support, his teeth gritted. The pain, raw and searing, lanced through his own mind from the psychic backlash. He saw Captain Sharma collapse, clutching her head, but his gaze remained fixed on the tactical display. The largest Voidweaver entity was twisting, its form destabilizing. It was being wounded. "Maintain the beam," Thorne roared, pushing through the agony. "Every last watt, show them why we are humanity." The unified beam from the 3 human ships continued to pour into the Voidweaver, holding it in place, slowly, agonizingly, tearing it apart. The psychic screams intensified, a symphony of cosmic pain. Then, with a final, shuddering surge of energy, the largest Voidweaver entity began to collapse in on itself, its massive form shrinking, dissolving into nothingness. A collective gasp, this one of sheer awe, escaped the few conclave members still conscious. One of the monsters, the largest of them, was gone, but the cost to humanity was horrific. On the holoscreen, the iron will and the unyielding spirit, their cores completely burned out, went dark, their crimson glow extinguished, adrift, silent husks. The vanguard of Sol itself, though still active, was a shadow of its former self, its systems on the verge of collapse. Thorne slumped against the console, breathing heavily. "Status report." "2 capital ships, neutralized, Admiral," Sharma replied, slowly rising, her face pale. "The primary Voidweaver gone. The remaining entities are scattering, their energy signatures in disarray." "They're running," Thorne murmured, a grim satisfaction in his voice. They had done it. They had driven back the ancient horror, but the threat was far from over. The remaining Voidweavers, though diminished, were still formidable. And humanity's fleet, for all its unparalleled might, was now severely crippled. Xylos watched the battered human fleet, a profound realization settling over her. Humanity hadn't just conquered the Cathar, they had just saved the Conclave, perhaps the entire galaxy, from an unimaginable doom. And they had done it alone, paying a price no other species would have contemplated. The question of what humanity wanted was no longer about territory or retribution. It was about survival, for everyone. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Thorne looked at the holographic display, at the remaining, smaller Voidweaver entities retreating into the void, and then at his own battered fleet. They were at their most vulnerable. "Oracle, send a direct, unencrypted channel to High Legate Xylos," Thorne commanded, his voice a low growl. "Tell her humanity has just given the Zenith Conclave a fighting chance. Tell her the ancient enemy has returned, and it will keep returning. Tell her we cannot fight this war alone anymore." A tense silence filled the conclave chamber as Xylos received the transmission. The voice of Admiral Valerius Thorne, raw and exhausted, filled the air. "High Legate Xylos, this is Admiral Thorne. Humanity has just repelled the primary Voidweaver entity, but at immense cost. 2 of our capital ships are gone, and the rest of our fleet is critically damaged." He paused, then continued, his voice hardening. "We have shown you what we are. We have shown you what we fight. Now the choice is yours, Conclave. Do you continue to hide behind your old politics, or do you finally stand with humanity against the true threat? The holoscreen shifted, showing the two derelict human capital ships, dark and lifeless against the cold stars. It was a stark, brutal image of sacrifice. The remaining Void Weaver entities, though retreating, still pulsed with ominous power in the distance. Xylos looked around at her traumatized, bewildered conclave members. The truth was undeniable. Humanity had carried a burden for millennia, fighting a secret war for the very fabric of existence. And now they had laid that burden at the conclave's feet. The galaxy was not safe. It never had been. And only humanity knew how to fight the real monsters. She took a deep breath, her crystalline form radiating newfound resolve. "Conclave members," she declared, her voice ringing with authority, "the time for debate is over. The time for alliance has arrived. We will unite with humanity. We will join their war, for the sake of all existence." A low, uncertain murmur filled the chamber. Unity with the species that had just dismantled the Cathar hegemony? It was an impossible notion moments ago. But the horrors they had just witnessed, and the chilling truth of humanity's forgotten past, left them with no other choice. On the Vanguard, Thorn watched the last of the Void Weavers disappear into the cosmic darkness. He turned to Captain Sharma, a grim smile touching his lips. "They accepted?" Sharma nodded slowly, her face still pale. High Legate Xylos just broadcasted an emergency decree across the entire Conclave network, full mobilization. Directive: support humanity against the Void Weavers, but Admiral, our fleet, we are barely operational. Thorn looked out at the stars, a cold, hard glint in his eyes. Then they will have to fight with what remains and learn what true warfare demands. He knew the path ahead would be brutal, but humanity had never shied from a challenge. The galaxy would now see the true face of humanity, not as conquerors seeking dominion, but as the unbreakable shield against a forgotten cosmic terror. The battle for existence had only just begun, and humanity, though wounded, stood ready, waiting to see if the rest of the galaxy would finally stand with them. Whoa, humanity just revealed their true purpose. What do you think, Conclave? Ready for some real cosmic horror? If you thought that was intense, hit that subscribe button, because the next part is where the true fight for galactic survival begins. Don't miss it. The conclave chamber pulsed with a frantic, uneasy energy. High Legate Xylos' decree had resonated across the stars, but unity born of fear was a fragile thing. Admiral Valerius Thorn's transmission, raw with the aftermath of battle and the blunt truth of humanity's existence, had shattered millennia of complacency. Now, a fragile alliance was forming in the crucible of impending doom. Within hours, the first conclave fleets arrived at the ravaged Cathar frontier. Their ships, sleek and aesthetically pleasing, designed for graceful patrols and ceremonial displays, drifted cautiously amidst the grim, battle-scarred vessels of the human fleet. The contrast was stark. The conclave's pristine hulls shone under the distant starlight, while humanity's warships bore the heavy marks of their desperate stand. Scorched plating, flickering internal lights, sections of hull visibly warped from the impossible strain of the Hammer Protocol. Two massive, silent hulks, the Iron Will and the Unyielding Spirit, floated as silent testaments to humanity's terrible sacrifice, their very forms eliminated from the inside out. On the main view screen of the Vanguard of Sol, the face of High Legate Xylos appeared, her crystalline features etched with weariness but also a profound new determination. She was accompanied by a dozen high-ranking conclave admirals, their varied forms radiating a mixture of apprehension and awe. "Admiral Thorn," Xylos began, her voice a low thrum that carried surprising authority, "our fleets are assembled as requested. We have gathered every operational vessel capable of engaging these entities." Thorn, despite his own exhaustion, straightened. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the conclave officers, the unspoken question of whether humanity, now so weakened, could still lead. "High Legate," he acknowledged, his voice gravelly but firm. "Your presence is noted. Your assistance, now freely given, is appreciated." He gestured to the tactical display. The remaining Void Weavers are regrouping in the Gris Nebula. Their primary nexus is gone, but their smaller forms are still capable of consuming entire systems. Our objective: drive them back, contain them, and learn how to permanently neutralize them. A GVAX admiral, his scaled face grim, spoke up. "Admiral, with respect, our vessels are designed for energy-based combat, for precision strikes against material targets. These Void Weavers, our weapons pass through them like ghosts. Our shields are useless." Thorn's gaze hardened. "Indeed, that is why you will not be fighting them directly, not yet." He activated a new series of tactical overlays. "Your role will be support and containment. Humanity's containment fields, though costly, are the only known defense. We will form the vanguard. Your fleets will establish secondary and tertiary containment rings around our positions. If any Void Weaver entity penetrates our primary line, your vessels will activate localized distortion fields, a strategy we developed in the Void. It won't stop them, but it will disrupt their movement, buy us precious seconds, and force them back towards our lines." The Conclave admirals exchanged uneasy glances. Distortion fields were a theoretical concept, highly dangerous to activate near Allied ships due to potential reality feedback. Thorn was asking them to step into the unknown, to mimic aspects of humanity's desperate, high-risk tactics. "Furthermore," Thorn continued, his voice leaving no room for argument, "your long-range sensors, your data analytics, are superior to ours for general galactic cartography. You will analyze their retreat patterns, predict their next targets, and you will provide rapid extraction for any human vessel that suffers critical containment failure. We will not abandon our people." Xylos nodded, sensing the unspoken challenge. "It will be done, Admiral. We have also brought supply convoys, repair crews. We recognize the cost humanity has paid." Thorn gave a curt nod. "Good, we will need it. This is not the end of the fight. It is merely the beginning of the next phase. Captain Sharma," he turned to his first officer, who had recovered from the psychic backlash but still looked strained, "prepare the fleet. New formations. Integrate Conclave assets into the tactical grid. Let's show the galaxy what a united front can achieve." The uneasy alliance took its first, tentative steps into the Void. Conclave vessels, still pristine but now imbued with a grim purpose, took up positions around humanity's battered fleet. The first engagement of the combined forces was brutal. The remaining Void Weavers, furious at the obliteration of their largest nexus, surged forward like a tide of pure anti-existence. Humanity's ships, still reeling from the Hammer Protocol, flared their crimson containment fields, forming a desperate shield. The psychic screams of the entities assaulted the minds of every sensitive Conclave crew member, a terrorizing symphony that caused many to collapse at their stations. But this time they had an anchor. This time they understood. A Mylorian fleet, positioned on the left flank, watched in horror as a human cruiser, the Valiant, flickered, its containment field dimming precariously. A jagged spire of solidified shadow lunged, tearing through its hull. But before the Void Weaver could fully consume it, a GVAX destroyer, acting on Thorn's directives, activated its experimental distortion field. The very space around the Void Weaver shimmered violently, momentarily destabilizing the entity, forcing it to recoil with a frustrated, soundless shriek. It bought the Valiant precious seconds. Human repair crews, already in small, agile shuttles, swarmed the damaged vessel, working with a terrifying speed and disregard for their own safety. "They do not retreat," a Zecorian pilot exclaimed, watching the scene. "They do not yield." Conclave fleets, initially hesitant, now began to operate with a newfound precision, driven by the sheer, unyielding tenacity of their human allies. They ran interference, disrupted Void Weaver movements, and pulled back human vessels teetering on the brink of annihilation. Humanity, in turn, unleashed their Hammer protocol in smaller, targeted bursts, sacrificing individual ships to eliminate critical Void Weaver nodes, buying precious time for the Conclave to learn and adapt. Admiral Thorne, despite the constant agony of psychic feedback and the critical state of his own flagship, directed the battle with cold, unwavering precision. His orders were concise, brutal, and effective. He pushed his crews past every conceivable limit, drawing on centuries of hidden warfare against this very enemy. "Containment field failing on the Defiant," Captain Sharma called out, her voice ragged. "We're losing too many, Admiral. The strain is unsustainable." Thorne saw it. Humanity's vanguard was cracking. The Void Weavers were relentless. He knew what he had to do. "Oracle, prepare all remaining Hammer-capable vessels. Coordinate a full-fleet defensive Hammer wave. Target, immediate forward arc. Every remaining unit capable of a core discharge. Unleash everything we have left." Sharma stared at him aghast. "Admiral, that would cripple the entire remaining fleet. We'd be defenseless, drifting." "It will buy the Conclave the time they need to retreat, to regroup," Thorne roared, his voice hoarse but filled with absolute conviction. "We've shown them what we fight. Now we show them what we are. We are the shield, Captain, and sometimes the shield breaks so others can live." The order went out across the human fleet. Every operational vessel, battered and bleeding energy, began to charge its core reactors. On the Conclave's holoscreen, Xylos and her admirals watched in horrified fascination as the human fleet, instead of retreating from the overwhelming Void Weaver surge, flared with an incandescent, blinding white light. It was a final, desperate act, a collective, suicidal discharge of every ounce of power they possessed. From every human ship, a wave of pure, concentrated anti-void energy erupted, slamming into the Void Weavers. There was no sound, only a profound, shuddering impact that rippled through the cosmos. The remaining Void Weaver entities recoiled, their forms dissolving, their psychic screams a final, desperate howl of pain and frustration as they were finally, irrevocably, driven back into the deepest, darkest corners of the void. They were not eliminated, not entirely, but they were defeated, broken, forced back into whatever interdimensional abyss they had emerged from. But the cost was immense. As the blinding white light faded, the human fleet was left adrift. Dozens of vessels went dark, their cores burned out, their systems silent forever. The vanguard of Sol itself, Thorne's flagship, was barely a ghost in the void, its lights flickering, its engines silent. Humanity's shield, forged in suffering, had indeed broken, but it had saved the galaxy. A stunned silence fell over the Conclave chamber. The Void Weavers were gone. The threat, for now, had subsided, and the humans were crippled. High Legate Xylos, tears welling in her crystalline eyes, could no longer contain her emotion. They did it," she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence she had never before felt for another species. "They saved us." On the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Sharma stumbled to Thorne's side. "Admiral, what remains of our fleet is minimal. We cannot hold another line. We are out of reserves." Thorne, slumped against his command chair, managed a weak smile. "Then we rest, Captain, for a moment. We have given them a chance. Now it is their turn to prove they are worthy." The Zenith Conclave, utterly humbled and fundamentally changed, fulfilled their promise. Conclave fleets, no longer engaged in battle, converged on the silent, drifting human vessels. Repair crews, medical teams, and engineers poured onto the battered hulls. They worked tirelessly, their expressions a mix of grim duty and profound respect. They saw the human faces, exhausted but defiant, hardened by millennia of a burden they had borne alone. They understood, finally, the true nature of humanity. Not conquerors, not avengers, but guardians. Protectors forged in the fires of cosmic horror. The remaining Void Weaver entities, though driven back, still existed, dormant in the deepest, uncharted regions of the void. Humanity had ensured they would not threaten the core galaxy for a long, long time. But the war was not truly over, only paused. And now, the Conclave, armed with the truth of humanity's history, and the understanding of the persistent, existential threats beyond their borders, was prepared. The combined forces, battered but united, began the long journey of galactic repair and reconstruction. The Cathar hegemony's former territories, once a source of conflict, were now a joint effort in rebuilding, populated by a populace grateful for the end of both Cathar tyranny and Voidweaver terror. Humanity, no longer a myth but a living, breathing, awe-inspiring reality, began to share its knowledge, its unique understanding of the universe's true horrors. The Zenith Conclave, transformed by the crucible of this shared conflict, underwent a fundamental shift. Their old politics, their cautious diplomacy, their self-serving expansionism, all shattered by the stark reality humanity had revealed. They moved towards a new era, one of genuine cooperation, forged not from convenience, but from a profound, shared purpose: survival against the unknown. High Legate Xylos, now hailed as a visionary, worked tirelessly alongside Admiral Thorn, coordinating the monumental task of rebuilding, and perhaps one day venturing into the deep void to find Terra, humanity's lost home. On the newly reconstructed bridge of the Vanguard of Sol, Admiral Thorn looked out at the bustling shipyards, where Conclave and human engineers worked side by side, creating new vessels designed with a blend of human resilience and Conclave technological refinement. He knew the fight was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and the void held countless terrors. But now humanity was not alone. They had allies who understood, allies who would fight beside them. Captain Sharma stood beside him, a rare, relaxed smile on her face. "Admiral, the first of the new Explorer-class vessels is ready for deep void trials. Its crew is a joint human conclave unit." Thorn nodded, a hint of something resembling peace in his eyes. "Good, we will continue our search for Terra, for the answers, and for whatever else lurks out there." He looked out at the endless stars, a universe still full of dangers, but also of newfound hope. Humanity had returned. They had revealed the truth, and they had ensured that the galaxy would never again forget what it meant to be truly resilient. The age of myth was over. The age of humanity, standing vigilant, had just begun. And that concludes our epic saga. They thought humans were myths, until their armada appeared. If you were captivated by humanity's sacrifice and their triumph, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel for more thrilling HFY stories that explore the incredible spirit of humankind. And tell us in the comments below, what was your favorite moment from this entire series, and what do you hope humanity finds next in the vast cosmos? We love hearing from you.